Imagine this. You're a soldier from India fighting for Great Britain in Palestine. You're being shot at by Germans and Ottomans, and it's all because some guy shot an Austrian Archduke in a city you've literally never heard of. This was the insane reality of the First World War. It was a crazy mess of alliances that dragged almost every powerful country on earth into a brutal war, and it all started with a single gunshot on a street in Sarajevo. How is that even possible? How does one bullet plunge the entire world into a war that kills over 20 million people and completely redraws the map? It seems impossible, completely illogical. But here's the secret. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand on June 28, 1914, wasn't actually the cause of the war. It was just the spark. The world in 1914 was a giant powder keg just waiting to explode. To understand the Great War, you have to understand the world that made it. A world of massive empires, insane nationalism, and secret deals that put every country on a crash course they could not escape. This is the story of that one spark, but it's also the story of the powder keg itself. The story of how one death led to the death of millions. Before we go to Sarajevo, we need to look at a map of Europe in the early 1900s. And what you see is a continent of empires at the absolute peak of their power. You have the British Empire, controlling a quarter of the entire world's population. The French owned huge chunks of Africa and Asia. The Russian Empire stretched all the way from the Baltic Sea to the Pacific. And in the middle, you had two newer but super powerful empires, the German Empire and the massive, ancient, and deeply troubled Austro-Hungarian Empire. This world ran on imperialism. For decades, these great powers were in a scramble for Africa and other lands, all fighting for resources, money, and bragging rights. This competition created so much suspicion and rivalry. Things were super tense between old-school empires like Britain and France and the new guy, Germany, who felt like it deserved its own place in the sun. To handle the tension, Europe created the most complicated and dangerous buddy system ever. Think of it like this. If you punch me, my friend punches you, and then his friend punches your friend until the entire continent is in a massive brawl. On one side, you had the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. They were a squad. On the other side was the Triple Entente, which was basically a handshake deal between France, Russia, and Great Britain. France and Russia teamed up because they were both terrified of Germany. France was still mad about losing a war to them in 1870 and having two of their provinces taken. Russia, who saw itself as the big brother to all Slavic people, was getting super nervous about Austria-Hungary trying to take over the Balkans. And Britain, the biggest naval power in the world, was watching Germany build a massive navy and saw it as a direct threat to its entire empire. These alliances were supposed to keep the peace. The idea was that nobody would start a fight if it meant fighting everybody. In reality, it created a tripwire for global war. A small local fight could now instantly blow up, pulling in every major power one by one like dominoes. There were no takebacks. No way to stop it. The system was basically designed for a world war. And the fuel for this entire machine? Militarism. The great powers were in a massive arms race. Germany and Britain were in a contest to see who could build the biggest and best battleships. Armies were getting huge, with millions of soldiers ready to go at a moment's notice. Military leaders created these incredibly aggressive war plans. The most famous was Germany's Schlieffen Plan, a crazy gamble to fight a war on two fronts against France and Russia. The plan was to invade France through neutral Belgium, knock them out in 6 weeks, and then deal with the giant but slow Russian army. It was a logistical masterpiece, but it was so rigid that once you started it, you couldn't stop it. It turned any crisis into a frantic race against time. And finally, under all of this was the most explosive force of all, nationalism. In an age of empires with dozens of different ethnic groups, the idea that every nation should have its own country was world-changing. And nowhere was this idea more explosive than in the Balkans, a place nicknamed the powder keg of Europe. For centuries, the Balkans were ruled by the crumbling Ottoman Empire. But as they got weaker, new countries like Serbia popped up, and giant empires like Austria-Hungary and Russia swooped in to gain influence. The center of all of this was Serbia. Serbian nationalists had this powerful dream of creating a Greater Serbia, or a unified South Slav state, a Yugoslavia, that would unite all the Slavic people in the area. There was just one massive obstacle in their way: the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Austria-Hungary was a mix of Germans, Hungarians, Czechs, Poles, and millions of South Slavs. In 1908, Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia, which made Serbia and its big friend Russia furious. To Serbian nationalists, Austria-Hungary was the ultimate villain. So secret groups formed, dedicated to freeing their Slavic brothers from Austro-Hungarian rule by literally any means necessary. So that was the world in 1914. Clashing empires, a continent split into two armed teams, a crazy arms race, and white-hot nationalist anger. All it needed was a spark, and that spark was about to be lit by a man who, ironically, might have been the only person who could have prevented the entire thing. Archduke Franz Ferdinand was not exactly Mr. Popular. He was the nephew of the old Emperor Franz Joseph, and after some family tragedies, he became the heir to the giant Austro-Hungarian throne. He was known for having a bad temper, being bossy, and having super conservative views. He was always fighting with the old guys at court, including his own uncle. A lot of the drama was about his wife. In 1900, Franz Ferdinand married Countess Sophie Chotek. Even though she was a noble, she wasn't considered good enough to marry a Habsburg heir. It was a love marriage, which meant he had to agree that their kids could never, ever rule. Sophie could never be empress. This was a huge insult to the proud Archduke, and he made a point of bringing her to official events to give her the respect she was denied at home. His decision to have his wife by his side would have deadly consequences. But there was way more to Franz Ferdinand than just a bad attitude. He was the Inspector General of the Army and a huge player in politics, and he was a reformer. He saw that his empire was rotting from the inside. He knew the way it was set up, giving a ton of power to the Hungarians, wasn't working. It was making the empire's massive Slavic population angry and fueling the nationalism that was threatening to tear everything apart. Franz Ferdinand had a radical plan to save his empire. He wanted to create a third, semi-independent Slavic kingdom within the empire. This would have given the South Slavs a voice and a reason to be loyal. An even crazier idea was a United States of Greater Austria, turning the empire into a bunch of self-governing states, all under the emperor. So this guy was a total paradox. His plans were actually kind of progressive. By giving Slavic people more rights, he hoped to kill the appeal of Serbian nationalism. If Slavs were treated well inside the empire, why would they want to join Serbia? He believed the nationalism will cease immediately if our Slavs are given a comfortable, fair, and good life. But this made him a target for everyone. The Hungarian elites hated him. The old guard in Vienna thought he was a radical. And most importantly, Serbian nationalists and their secret societies saw him as the single biggest threat to their dream of a greater Serbia. A cruel, oppressive Austria was the perfect enemy for them. But a reformed Austria that kept its Slavic people happy, that would make their entire movement pointless. Franz Ferdinand didn't just represent the oppressor, he represented a future that could completely destroy their dream. And here's the biggest irony of all. Franz Ferdinand was one of the only powerful people in Vienna who was against going to war with Serbia. He argued all the time with the chief of the general staff, Konrad von Hotzendorf, who was obsessed with starting a preemptive war. Franz Ferdinand warned that a war with Serbia would drag Russia into the fight, a war he predicted would end with the fall of the Romanovs or with the fall of the Habsburgs, perhaps both. He was a hawk, but he was smart enough to see the danger. So, in June 1914, when the heir to the throne planned a visit to Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, he was the one man whose vision was an existential threat to Serbian nationalists. And he was walking straight into the heart of their territory on a day that had massive historical meaning. The target was chosen, and the plotters were getting ready. The assassins were part of a movement called Young Bosnia. These guys weren't professional killers. They were mostly students and teenagers, born angry about Austro-Hungarian rule. They were poets and dreamers who saw themselves as freedom fighters. They would meet in secret, burning with the desire to create Yugoslavia. One of them was a 19-year-old Bosnian Serb named Gavrilo Princip. Born to a poor family, Princip was small, quiet, and a hardcore ideologue. He'd been kicked out of school for protesting Austria. For him, the dream of a unified nation was everything, and he was 100% ready to die for it. At his trial, he said, "I am a Yugoslav nationalist, aiming for the unification of all Yugoslavs, but it must be free from Austria. But ideas don't get you bombs and guns." Young Bosnia had a powerful and deadly sponsor, a secret society called Unification or Death, better known as the Black Hand. The Black Hand was not a group of students. It was a secret network of Serbian military officers founded around 1911 with one goal: create a greater Serbia using terrorism and violence to do it. Their logo was a skull and crossbones, a bomb, a dagger, and poison. Their motto was unification or death. And this was not some fringe group. Its members were all over the Serbian army and government. Their leader was the powerful chief of Serbian military intelligence, Colonel Dragutin Dimitrijević, codename Apis. Apis and the Black Hand saw Franz Ferdinand's reforms as a death sentence to their cause. When they heard he was visiting Sarajevo, they saw their chance. They recruited a few young, expendable fanatics, including Gavrilo Princip, to carry out the assassination. The date of the visit was, to the Serbians, a massive insult. June 28th is St. Vitus's Day, or Vidovdan, a super important day in Serbian history. It was the anniversary of the 1389 Battle of Kosovo, where the Serbian kingdom was crushed by the Ottoman Empire. That battle is a symbol of Serbian resistance. For the heir of the Austrian oppressor to parade through Sarajevo on their most important national holiday was an insult they could not ignore. The Black Hand gave the young assassins 4 pistols, 6 bombs, and cyanide pills to swallow after the job was done. After some quick training, they were smuggled from Serbia into Bosnia. In Sarajevo, a local guy named Danilo Ilic helped coordinate the whole thing and hand out the weapons. The plan itself was almost amateur. Ilic just placed the 6 assassins along the announced parade route, a street called Apple Key. They were just a line of nervous young guys waiting for their shot. There was no escape plan. It was a suicide mission. Meanwhile, security for the Archduke was unbelievably bad. Even though there were warnings of plots, the governor of Bosnia, General Oskar Podiorak, only assigned about 120 local cops for the entire route. The Archduke and his wife were riding in an open-top car, making them a perfect exposed target. The stage was set. The killers were in place. The Archduke was on his way. The fate of the 20th century was now in the hands of a few young men hiding in a cheering crowd with guns and bombs in their pockets. Sunday, June 28, 1914, was a beautiful, sunny day in Sarajevo. The city was covered in flags for the royal visit. Archduke Franz Ferdinand and Sophie had just spent 2 days watching military drills. This part of the trip was a huge deal for them. Because of her lower rank, Sophie was usually kept away from her husband at formal events. But here, she was allowed to be right by his side. It was their 14th wedding anniversary. The couple arrived at the Sarajevo train station just before 10 a.m. They met General Potorek and got into an open-top car for the ride to City Hall. Franz Ferdinand was in a full-dress uniform with a plumed helmet. Sophie wore a white dress and a big hat. They smiled and waved at the crowds. The motorcade had 6 cars. The Archduke's was the second car. The assassins were waiting. The first 2 they passed completely froze and did nothing. But the third, a young guy named Nedeljko Čabrinović, was ready. As the car got close, he armed his bomb and threw it. And here, crazy luck stepped in for the first time. The driver saw something flying at them and slammed on the gas. The bomb bounced off the car, sailed past the Archduke, and blew up under the next car, wounding 2 officers and a bunch of people in the crowd. It was complete chaos. Smoke everywhere. Čabrinović swallowed his cyanide pill and jumped into the shallow river. But the poison was old and just made him vomit. The river was only a few inches deep. He was immediately dragged out and arrested. The motorcade stopped. Franz Ferdinand was furious, but okay. He checked on Sophie, who was fine. Instead of leaving the city, they decided to continue to City Hall. When they got there, the super angry Archduke yelled at the mayor, "Mr. Mayor, I come here on a visit and I am greeted with bombs. It is outrageous." After that tense meeting, they made a new plan. Franz Ferdinand, being stubborn, insisted on visiting the officers wounded by the bomb at the hospital. To be safe, General Potorek decided they should skip the crowded city center and just drive straight down the Apo Key. It was a good plan. But in all the chaos, someone made a critical mistake. Nobody told the driver. Leopold Lojka, the driver, was still following the original route. As the motorcade started up again, he turned off the Apple Key at the Latin Bridge, heading onto Franz Joseph Street, just like the original plan said. General Potorek, in the car, realized the mistake instantly. He screamed, "What is this? This is the wrong way. We're supposed to take the Apple key." Loika slammed on the brakes. The giant car with its clunky manual transmission stalled. He started the slow, awkward process of trying to back up. The car was a sitting duck, stopped just a few feet from the sidewalk. And there, standing on that exact sidewalk, at that exact moment, was Gavrilo Princip. After the bomb failed, the assassins had scattered. Princip, depressed and thinking they had lost their chance, had wandered down a side street. He stopped outside a deli, maybe to get a sandwich. And then, impossibly, his target was delivered right to him. A wrong turn, a missed message, a stalled car, a chain of pure chance brought the heir to the empire to a dead stop, less than 5 feet away from him. Princip didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, pulled out his pistol, and fired 2 shots. He later said he meant to shoot the general, not Sophie, but in the chaos, his aim wasn't perfect. The first bullet hit Sophie in the abdomen. The second hit the Archduke in the neck, tearing his jugular vein. For a second, nobody realized what just happened. Sophie fell over onto her husband. Witnesses heard him plead, "Sophie, Sophie, don't die. Live for our children." An aide asked if he was hurt. The Archduke, with his life draining away, just whispered, "It is nothing," over and over before he passed out. They were both dead in minutes. Princip tried to shoot himself, but the crowd jumped him and wrestled the gun away. He also swallowed his cyanide, but just like the other guys, it failed. He was beaten by the mob before being arrested. The spark was struck. One gunshot, made possible by a series of blunders and unbelievable coincidences, had killed an Archduke and his wife. Now the powder keg of Europe would finally ignite. News of the assassination sent shockwaves across Europe, but nobody immediately screamed, "World War." It was seen as a terrible terrorist attack and a huge crisis for Austria-Hungary. In Vienna, people were shocked, but some saw an opportunity. The assassination was the perfect excuse for Austria-Hungary to finally crush Serbia. But Austria couldn't do it alone. It was worried that attacking Serbia would make Russia, Serbia's big brother, step in. So to attack Serbia, Austria-Hungary needed a promise from its most powerful ally, Germany. On July 5th, 1914, an Austrian diplomat went to Berlin. In a moment that sealed Europe's fate, Kaiser Wilhelm II and his government gave Austria-Hungary the blank check. Germany offered its unconditional support for whatever Austria did, promising to back them up even if it meant war with Russia. The Germans gambled that Russia would back down. It was a catastrophic mistake. With Germany's promise, Vienna spent the next few weeks planning its next move. They didn't want a peaceful solution. They wanted a war they knew they could win. On July 23rd, almost a month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary sent a 10-point ultimatum to Serbia. It was written to be so extreme that no independent country could ever accept it. It demanded Serbia crush all anti-Austrian propaganda, shut down nationalist groups like the Black Hand, and, this was the deal breaker, let Austrian officials take part in the investigation on Serbian soil. Serbia had just 48 hours to reply. On July 25th, the Serbian government agreed to almost everything. They accepted 9 of the 10 points, only rejecting the part about Austrian officials working inside Serbia. Leaders across Europe thought the crisis was over, but Austria-Hungary wasn't looking for a win. It was looking for an excuse. It declared Serbia's response unsatisfactory, and this is where the dominoes began to fall with terrifying speed. July 28th, exactly 1 month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia and starts bombing its capital, Belgrade. July 30th, in response, Russia, the defender of the Slavs, orders a full mobilization of its gigantic army. This one move turned a local crisis into a European crisis. August 1st, Germany saw Russia mobilizing as a direct threat. Its entire war strategy, the Schlieffen Plan, was all about speed. Germany declared war on Russia. August 3rd, following the insane logic of the Schlieffen Plan, Germany declared war on France. And to get to France as fast as possible, German troops had to take the quickest route. August 4th, Germany invaded neutral Belgium, breaking a treaty that was almost 100 years old. For Great Britain, this was the last straw. Britain couldn't let a hostile German army control the Belgian coast. Britain sent Germany an ultimatum: get out of Belgium. Germany refused. Britain declared war on Germany. In just over a month, a system of alliances and military plans, triggered by one terror attack, had plunged an entire continent into war. Every leader thought they were making a smart, defensive move, but together they created an unstoppable chain reaction. The powder keg had finally exploded. Looking back, the slide into war seems like it was totally unstoppable, but it wasn't. The July crisis was a story of massive human failure, a cascade of terrible decisions by leaders who were completely overwhelmed by the systems they had created. Austria-Hungary messed up by thinking it could fight a little war against Serbia and no one would care. They didn't get that in 1914, there was no such thing as a small war between nations backed by giants. Germany's mistake was even bigger. By giving Austria the blank check, they basically handed over the keys to their reckless friend. They bet that Russia was bluffing and that Great Britain would stay out of it. They were wrong on both counts. Kaiser Wilhelm seemed to have second thoughts, but his generals told him it was too late to stop the Schlieff plan. The trains were already moving. It was out of his hands. Diplomacy, the one thing that could have stopped the madness, failed completely. The crisis moved too fast and communication was too slow. There was no UN to help. It was every empire for itself. The famous Willy-Nicky telegrams between Kaiser Wilhelm and his cousin, Tsar Nicholas, show two of the most powerful men in the world trying to stop the disaster, but they were helpless against the military machines they had started. And maybe the biggest irony of all is the man whose death started everything. Archduke Franz Ferdinand was one of the strongest voices in Austria-Hungary, arguing for peace and against a war with Serbia. His assassination removed a crucial voice of reason and gave all the power to the war hawks in Vienna. By killing the man they saw as their oppressor, the assassins accidentally eliminated the one person who might have prevented the war that would destroy their entire world. The Serbian government wasn't innocent either. While they officially condemned the assassination, the links between the assassins and the state-backed Black Hand were undeniable. The Serbian Prime Minister probably knew about the plot, but his warnings to Vienna were too vague, and his orders to stop the assassins were completely ignored. Every country involved would later release books trying to prove they were innocent, but the truth is, the war was a group failure, a failure of imagination, of diplomacy, and of leadership. It was a crisis that spun out of control because the war machines were just more powerful and more efficient than the peace machines. One gunshot, two deaths, and a chain reaction the world could not stop. The story of how World War I started is the story of a spark and a powder keg. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand was the spark, a shocking, random, and personal event. It was a story of teenage radicals, a secret society, a hated archduke, a wrong turn, and a stalled car. It's a crazy reminder that history can turn on the smallest of chances. But that spark would have done nothing if it hadn't landed in a Europe packed with the explosives of nationalism, imperialism, and militarism. The real cause of the war was the powder keg itself, the insane alliances that turned a local fight into a global one, the aggressive military plans that left no time for talking, the nationalist anger that made compromise feel like a betrayal, and the imperial rivalries that created a permanent climate of fear. The war that followed was a catastrophe unlike anything the world had ever seen. The soldiers who marched off in August 1914, thinking they'd be home by Christmas, were instead thrown into 4 years of trenches, machine guns, and poison gas. Empires that had lasted for centuries, the Austro-Hungarian, the Russian, the Ottoman, and the German, all crumbled into dust. Over 20 million people died, an entire generation was lost, and it all began on that sunny morning in Sarajevo. The shot fired by Gavrilo Princip did more than just kill an archduke, it killed an entire world. Thanks for watching. The story of World War I is so huge and complex, we've barely even scratched the surface. If you found this video informative, destroy that like button and subscribe for more insane deep dives into the events that shaped our world. Let us know in the comments what other part of the Great War you want us to cover next. And if you're curious what happened right after this, check out our video on the Battle of the Marne, where the brutal reality of this new kind of war became tragically clear. You won't believe it.